This is the Superintendent Shuffle Part 2. I am Danielle Ford, used to be on the CCSD school board. Now I'm on the Nevada State Board. And if you haven't listened to Part 1 yet, I broke down the messy and possibly shady process that led Jhone Ebert leaving the state to become CCSD's new superintendent. Now let's talk about what happened next, because what is a win for Clark County has thrown the entire state of Nevada into chaos. So just a few days after the CCSD superintendent vote, I'm getting ready for our next State Board of Education meeting. So I was already mentally preparing for a lot of work to come, because our board had discussed that if Jhone Ebert was selected by CCSD, that we would then have an item really quickly to discuss the process of replacing her. I mentioned in the first part that according to Nevada law, the state board is supposed to submit 3 names to the governor, who then chooses from those names to appoint a new superintendent of public instruction. So I'm thinking, okay, we will discuss this at the April 3rd meeting. We'll open the process to applicants. We'll do it right. But that's not what happened. Instead, I get texted a screenshot of Governor Lombardo announcing that he's already appointed an interim superintendent. No discussion, no vote, no meeting, no one informed me. What is happening? The new state superintendent that Governor Lombardo appointed, Steve Canavero. Now, if you don't know who that is, wait for it. I mentioned him in part 1. I mentioned him a lot in the previous season, okay? And regardless of your personal opinions on this person, this is not about a personnel change. This is about what happens when one person gets to make all of the rules and the people who are supposed to represent you don't even get a seat at the table. Let me set the full stage. We're preparing for a normal state board meeting. Jhone Ebert has just been selected CCSD's next superintendent, but she has not left her current role yet. We've said that once she officially leaves, we'd add an item to our next agenda to start the replacement process for the state superintendent. Simple enough, right? But then plot twist, a few days after our meeting, a memo goes out from Lombardo. No conversation, no request, just a memo. It says Steve Canavero has been appointed as interim superintendent of public instruction. No notice, no board discussion, no public process, just done. I want you all to realize that that's how this happened. Here's the issue. Nevada law doesn't actually say what happens in the case of an interim. It only outlines the process for permanent appointments, where the board is supposed to submit 3 names to the governor, and the governor picks one. That's it. There's nothing about how or when an interim can be appointed. Now, in the past, governors have named interims while the board figures things out, but that only happened after a superintendent resigned abruptly and the board didn't mind, apparently. But this is not that, and I do mind. This was a major leadership handoff with no transparency, no oversight, and no timeline. For all we know, this interim could be in place for a year or more with full authority and no accountability to the board and with 0 public input first. Let me remind you that the appointee, Steve Canavero, isn't some neutral placeholder. He is the former state superintendent from 2015 to 2019, right before Jhone Ebert. He was first placed as an interim. He is the architect of the Achievement School District, Nevada's failed experiment in privatization. He's a Chiefs for Change executive, and he currently works for West Ed, which is a company that is already under scrutiny for its contracts and its influence across different states and is currently working with Nevada. So let me remind you, this is not just a matter of who got the job, it's a matter of how it happened. One man, the governor, appointed another man with a long political history and privatization ties to a position that affects the entire state. And he did it without even telling us first. When I saw that memo, I wasn't just blindsided, I was furious. Not because of who got appointed, although that too, but because the entire process bypassed public input. And that is a huge deal when we're talking about the top education official in the entire state. So I did what I said I would do when I ran for office. I took action. I filed a formal open meeting law complaint because I believe that this appointment violates Nevada's open meeting law. Here's why. Nevada law requires deliberation and decision-making about public roles to happen in public. The law explains that the governor can appoint a superintendent when there's a vacancy, which I take as a resignation or something emergent. The state superintendent was still there and the board was handling it. This appointment happened behind closed doors, without a vote, without public comment, and without any board discussion. And while the governor is technically not a public body under open meeting law, the decision to let him act without public oversight is a governance issue and one that needs to be questioned. So I posted about that on all my platforms. I didn't water it down. I didn't play politics. I told the truth. Here's basically what I said. This wasn't a public discussion. It wasn't a transparent process. It wasn't about collaboration. It was a top-down political appointment handed to us like a done deal. Danielle Ford, Nevada State Board of Education. Okay, but that's not all. Now let's talk about West Ed, the company that Canavero currently works for. West Ed is a consulting and data group that's been involved in some very questionable nonpartisan contracts with Nevada. They're pushing hard to become the state's main data partner. And just 2 weeks before this appointment got made, the state already had an agenda item about them coming up at that same meeting. That item got tabled for now. It's going to be revisited. But now West Ed's own employee is sitting in the top seat of the Nevada Department of Education. Meanwhile, West Ed is on our agenda trying to get a vote to have access to all of our student data. You cannot make this stuff up. Again, I want to be clear, this is not me wanting to cause drama. I'm very upset because this is about power, precedent, and process. If the governor can bypass the board and just place anybody they want to, even temporarily with no transparency, what is stopping that person from doing it all the time? So now let's talk about the April 3rd state board meeting that just happened, where we had already planned on talking about what comes next. The item that we had was about the superintendent selection process, not about the interim superintendent. I still tried to finagle that conversation with our attorney, not stopping me, but trying to keep us focused on the task at hand. I was able to determine the board's thoughts on this appointment, though, because in talking about the superintendent selection process, some of the comments that came from the other board members still have me concerned. So now we're at this meeting and we're reacting to something in real time that has just been decided for us. I put it on the record that I filed an open meeting law complaint. I put it on the record that I didn't appreciate this happening. Some board members agreed with me, but a lot of board members start floating ideas about maybe just going along with the governor's decision. I said I'd like to make this search go quickly. We don't need to do a whole long process. I said it cost $150,000 for the CCSD board to get Jhone Ebert, and she just came right here, one little seat over. We don't need to, hire a search firm. We don't need to make a whole ordeal of it. We can have a new superintendent really quickly within a matter of a couple months. But then most of the board members don't want to rush that process. They want to make sure we take our time. We allow everybody to apply. We get the best possible superintendent. Okay, in theory. However, some board members and others agreed that maybe we should consider that since the governor has to choose one of these three names, we should put names forward that we know that he would select. Because if he says no to them, we'll have to start the process all over. Now, I have been in agreement with the majority of the board so far, and I've been happy that the conversation is usually rational. But this time I literally said, I feel like I'm living in crazy land listening to this right now. What is happening? I said, it's our job to choose the best three candidates, pro-public education candidates. We can't control what the governor does. If the governor receives the candidates we selected and votes them down, then we deal with that. We don't water down our role because of what may or may not happen later. I say that some of us are accountable to the public. Now, flash forward to a few days ago, at this point in time at the meeting, I didn't know, but the Attorney General, whom I submitted the open meeting law complaint to, just recently dismissed it, saying that because Lombardo is not a public body, it doesn't fall under open meeting law. So I'm at this day right now, not really sure what to do. I guess the Ethics Commission is next, but let's not forget that the last time that I filed an ethics complaint against former CCSD trustee Lola Brooks for working behind the scenes with Superintendent Jara, and it was about to go to the ethics panel for jurisdiction, immediately CCSD/Jara hired the Ethics Commission director to work as legal counsel. Oh my God, I covered this in the board member Bought by Billionaires episode. So like, I don't have a whole lot of faith that that is what I do. Like, who holds the governor accountable? Can he just do anything he wants to? What world is this? Now, let me take a minute to explain something that I didn't even fully understand before I got elected. I'm going to tell you how the Nevada State Board actually works and why it matters. Most people assume that the Nevada State Board of Education functions like a traditional school board with oversight over the superintendent, policy decisions, etc. But that's not how it works in Nevada. Here's the breakdown. Before 2011, the state superintendent reported to the state board, just like superintendents report to local school boards. But in 2011, a law passed that changed everything. Since then, the superintendent reports directly to the governor, and the state board was reduced to more of an advisory role. In the org chart, the state board is right next to the state superintendent, kind of off to the side, and the state superintendent has an arrow pointing up to the governor. We can approve or deny certain items, but we don't get any input early in the process, and most decisions are either predetermined or outside our authority. And it gets even weirder. I realized during the campaign process that state board members don't get paid anything. Now compare that to CCSD trustees who get a $9,000 annual stipend. It's not that great, but it's still something. Like, my question is why? It's a very non-appealing seat. It also costs $200 to run for a State Board of Education seat. And in comparison, it only costs $30 to run for a local school board, and it costs only $100 to run for Assembly or Senate. Now, the makeup of the State Board is that only 4 of the 11 members are publicly elected. The rest are appointed by the governor, legislative leadership, or specific organizations. And that is part of what changed as well in 2011. And I'll just say that while I am pro publicly elected school boards, I'm not shading the current appointed members. Many of them have been very thoughtful, aligned, and have voted with integrity. So I'm not saying anything about the members, but it's a little concerning that only 4 are elected, don't you think? Because here's what that setup really means. It means that the public has limited representation at the state level, and that the superintendent, the person with the most power over education statewide, is not accountable to the board that you elected. What is the point of me even running and campaigning for nearly a year? That's a structural flaw. And I believe it's a crisis when there's a sudden vacancy, because instead of a public process, we got a private one. Instead of a board-led decision, we got a press release. Instead of transparency, we get whatever this is. Now, I'll say this, that since I joined the board in January, we've had some solid moments of pushback. We've said no to proposals that didn't make sense. We've stopped some bad policies before they gain traction. And while the public doesn't always see those wins, those matter. Actually stopping something bad is much more difficult and usually more important than rubber stamping something shiny. Now, we have been very fortunate that State Superintendent Jhone Ebert has chosen to include the state board, respects the board's voice and constituents. But that's not a given moving forward, because again, we don't choose a superintendent, and we didn't choose the one that's starting soon. The governor did. The superintendent is under the governor, not the state board. It cites that the state superintendent acts at the pleasure of the governor. That law needs to get fixed. I actually am shocked that it has not been brought up since 2011. That could cause a lot of future problems. It could cause the whole community looking at the state board going, why don't you have authority? Why are you letting whatever this is at the state level happen? And everyone's going to throw their hands up in the air, and it's going to be CCSD all over again. I'm just saying, it at least very well could be, and we should all care that that's a possibility. So to sum it all up, CCSD's search was messy, maybe even manipulated. The state superintendent was plucked mid-process without a plan. The governor supported Superintendent Ebert in being CCSD's superintendent, by the way. The governor then appointed someone with a privatization track record, no questions asked, to the State Board of Nevada as interim superintendent with complete authority. And neither the public nor the state board and the elected officials he represented had any say in it. That's not just shady, it's a systemic problem. I don't think I'm alone in thinking that that is shady AF. Do you care about this? And honestly, if not, then what am I even doing? Like, I'm so frustrated. So I don't know what is coming down the line, but whatever it is, if it isn't supporting the public education system, I'm not going to be quiet about it. Now, if this episode gave you context, clarity, or made you yell, "What?" out loud at any point, please share it with somebody in your network who cares about public education. Support this work by donating or sponsoring at unravelingeducation.com/sponsor. And stay updated by following Unraveling Education on all socials. And if you want to follow the stuff happening in my elected official role, I have a dedicated page for that, Facebook page /Trustee Ford. And I also post on my personal-ish /marketing pages, Danielle Ford LV on Instagram and TikTok. But I try to keep the podcast stuff and the updates from my elected role separately. If you're new here, this podcast is not just a rant. It is a real-time record of what's happening behind the scenes in CCSD, in Nevada, and across the country, with a spotlight on who's pulling the strings and who's paying the price. Now, if you have information about either part 1 or part 2, insight, or you just want to yell into the void with me, send it my way. Please leave a comment. I want to hear your thoughts. Because the first step into fixing a rigged system is to name it loudly, together. Until next time, Unravelers, stay loud, stay sharp, and stay curious.